And now, Mr. Harris for 6 minutes.
Much, Chair, and I want to thank the three presenters on very comprehensive presentations and for your presence here today. First of all, to Mr. Neve, and nice to see you again, and thank you for joining us. I appreciated your 10 reasons why this law is absolutely wrong, including the fact that it was abused from the very beginning, from day one, because that is exactly what we're dealing with. But we do have a situation, and perhaps I can ask you this first. Well, first of all, actually, we did make a pledge at the request of both China and the UK back in 1997 to do our utmost to promote the continuing rule of law in Hong Kong and the autonomy of its institutions, and a number of other countries did the same. I don't know, and I've asked other witnesses this, is there any evidence that Canada has done very much in the past 20 plus years to actually try to secure these things during the last period of time? That's number one. But one thing that's in that declaration, and which covers something we're talking about here today, obviously rights, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights was in fact agreed to be applied to Hong Kong, guaranteeing the right to life, freedom of religion, freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, electoral rights, rights to due process, and a fair trial. Very few of which apply in the national security law that's now been imposed. But I want to ask you, is that what leverage is there for the fact that this is said to apply to Hong Kong? As was pointed out just a few minutes ago, China has signed this covenant, but not ratified it, but China is bound by it in respect to Hong Kong. Is that something that can be used, or is that the subject of the UN effort you're talking about?
Well, thank you for both questions, Mr. Harris. With respect to sort of an overview of Canada's history of standing up for rights and democracy over these 20 plus years, I probably don't have time, and actually would frankly admit I probably don't have full knowledge to give you a thorough answer to that question. I guess I would focus on the last year and a half where there have been a number of occasions where Canada's voice has been one of the few to be heard on the world stage, generally with 1, 2, or sometimes as many as 20 to 25 other states in partnership, raising some of these concerns, not in strident or strong language, and perhaps not as strongly as Amnesty International would write, but Canada's been a leader, I think, along with a few others, at a time when very few states are even prepared to whisper a note of concern. I think we've all made recommendations around how that needs to continue, how it needs to become even more multilateral, how maybe we now need to see some more substantial content in terms of what Canada is raising. With respect to your question about the International Covenant, I do think it's a very important piece of the strategy here, and particularly is something Canada should be very much relying upon. And I think it is what opens up, and Sophie was highlighting this as well, the various kinds of UN-focused strategies that really need to be taken much more seriously. So far, we've managed to get some joint statements, either orally at the Human Rights Council or kind of released in writing on the margins of the Human Rights Council, but there's not yet been an initiative, a resolution, a special session within the Council itself. China's always been out of bounds, too much power, too much influence, and that has to give. And using the fact that one of the most important UN human rights treaties governs here is the obvious opening for doing so.
Thank you. That's very helpful. You did mention there was some talk of the Magnitsky sanctions, and relatively few countries have such laws in place. That the UK only very recently passed. Is that something in the context you mentioned the need for coordinated effort, and the largest group that joined together was about 27 or 28 countries just recently on June 30th. Are you confident that there could be a larger coalition developed and to support coordinated effort to try and actually change the approach of China towards Hong Kong, or are we dealing with trying to solve the problem of people who need refuge or need safe harbor and need to be dealt with?
Well, I would draw a distinction between the statement I referred to at the end of June wasn't about the Magnitsky Act or sanctions per se. I think, yes, there probably is more space to build the list of countries who gather around those kinds of statements, as opposed to taking more controversial steps like imposing sanctions. That should be a real focus. Canada is a key multilateral player. We have connections across so many different fora. We really should be doing everything we can to get that number from 28 to 35 to 43 to 58 and climbing. So I do think that that's a very important way forward for Canada.
Would the other two panelists care to, Ms. Richardson, perhaps you want to weigh in on that?
Sure. I on many levels, I can't improve on what Alex has just offered up, but I think there is a real moment of momentum here that Canada could really seize on, and that many other governments would come along. If you look at, for example, the constituency of governments who've been outraged rightly about abuses of Uyghurs, if you look at some of the governments that are very concerned about not being able to get good information about the origins of COVID, and now if you look at the constituency of governments who are very concerned about Hong Kong,